This is a review of all 6 volumes in the Vault of Simpsonology series. What I love about these is they feel like the next natural evolution of a style of Simpsons novelty books, the earliest ideas of which you can actually find in Matt Groening's Life is Hell comics, but the mold was firmly established with Bart Simpson's Guide to Life in 1993. A decade later, that evolved into the Simpsons Library of Wisdom series, which I have previously reviewed and talk more about this tradition, style, and development. Those books ended in 2010, and in the last volume there was a list of supposed forthcoming titles that just seemed like a joke, and most were. Some, however, did appear 3 years later with the Vault of Simpsonology, and it's kind of a grander reboot series, but with a lot of the concept and content still very in keeping with Bart's Guide to Life. But it's not just a regurgitation of those things, it also adds a new fantastic sense of novelty, specifically its physically interactive elements. Based on those and the Simpsonology title, I suspect that's inspired by the incomparable magnificence that is the Ology series of the books, which you may be aware of. They were very popular, resulting in a flood of imitators. Simpsons was a little late on the trend, but the important thing they at least realized, unlike almost all the other imitators, is that throwing together some lift the flaps and removable letters isn't what made the Ology series great. It was the supreme effort and creativity. I'm certainly not saying the Simpsonology books are on the same level, but creativity and effort are also these books' virtues that makes them commendable and very, very fun. It's important to stress that, like all the previous Simpsons books, they are just about novelty and fun, and that's all they need to be. But you need to be aware that that's their nature. Other similarities they share with many previous Simpsons books include the same style of writing. I personally wouldn't call it funny, rather just amusing. The majority of the humor is based on wordplay. Also, as with the earlier books, they are presented as if written by their characters themselves, but not in a strictly immersive way where it would be an actual in-world book. Also, like the other books, describing the content is kind of futile because of how varied it is, but looking through them will convey the content better than I could ever summarize. It's just miscellany, more or less tied to an overarching theme: laziness, geekiness, mischief, etc. That variety contained within each one is one of the best features, especially tied with the creativity and ideas. Each little topic or feature is only 2 to 4 pages, so each turn of the page is very stimulating and you're constantly kept engaged. The books are only 64 pages, but that feels fine. The quality and quantity of the content are enough to be satisfying, and very rarely did I feel there were any that were a waste or not worth including. I've spoken about this in a couple of reviews on various Simpsons books, but the effort put in is so wonderful, commendable, and surprising. I mean, that shouldn't be a rare or surprising thing to see, but in a world where 99.9% of books are nothing more than the laziest cash-ins, and the Simpsons could easily get away with doing that and make more than enough sales just because it's the Simpsons, so that they frequently go above and beyond with a lot of their books to make them great for their own sake is top-shelf bookmaking, even for something like how all the art is custom-made for the books, not screenshots or anything. The only thing it could have used a little more of is just another 2 interactive elements per book, because excluding the cover envelopes, the pages only feature 4 or 5 each. The elements themselves are occasionally immersive, like notes, but most are more just about novelty in presentation, which is absolutely fine because they are very fun and creative. But as the series' defining feature, they should have had a little bit of a stronger presence. The size of the pages is perfectly chosen, no bigger or smaller than they need to be. One thing to note about the physical components is that the first 2 books, Homer and Bart's, have cardboard slipcases, but they dispensed with that for the other 4, so if you get one of those, don't worry that it's missing. But now we're going to talk about what is probably the most important thing to understand about these books, the unexpected thing that may actually determine your interest in them, and that is Simpsonology is probably not the best title for this series, simply because these books are really not about The Simpsons. By the way, as I say The Simpsons throughout this, I'm referring to the show and the world, not specifically to the family. These books are essentially just general humor books with a Simpsons skin. That's fine, that's still a legitimate direction for a book and still completely enjoyable from that perspective. But to be completely frank, I'll admit, I still admire these books and think they're great in a more objective sense. But personally, as a fan, I was pretty disappointed by this severe lack of them feeling Simpsons-specific. So even though this isn't strictly a criticism, I still want to bring it up and explore it, because as a fellow fan, that might be what you're expecting and what you want, and you need to understand what you're getting. Basically, my disappointment was how the canon that is the show is so underused in these books. Except for visually, of course, you'll see tons and tons of characters, but references to things from the show and drawn from Springfield, while they crop up occasionally, but not only are they too few, they are what I would deem bizarrely rare for any show, but especially for one like this that had, at the time, over 500 episodes to draw from. Rather than making a book based on The Simpsons, it feels like they came up with a general humor book and then worked in a Simpsons veneer to fit that. You could keep that core and specifics for most of the content and switch out the Simpsons facade for any other cartoon show, whatever, changing the visuals, and it would still work just as well. They're basically just general humor, pop culture kind of books, where I would have liked a more specific sense of The Simpsons itself. Now, this is all true of Bart's Guide to Life as well, but I much preferred books like the Family Album, the Guide to Springfield, and the Library of Wisdom series. There was a much better sense of them using and feeling a part of the world of Springfield and of the characters themselves that I feel this series lacks in comparison. This is all heightened by what is my only actual criticism of the books. Now, as I said, all of the books are presented as if written by the characters, and not just the title character, but tons of others chip in for their own segments. You'll see a lot of speech bubbles from them addressing you directly. The problem is that the writing is absolutely terrible at capturing the voice of almost any of the characters, and I promise this isn't just me being a pedantic fan. It is actually embarrassingly and inexplicably bad, like it was written by people who have never heard these characters talk. They're mostly written by Bill Morrison, who I credit as being the through line of creating, or at least working on most of these Simpsons books over the years that makes them so consistent. Some of these Simpsonology books are also co-authored with other writers from the comics, but they really should have got some of the show writers for these, or apparently even just someone who seems to have seen the show. This idea of each being a guidebook based on a specific theme sounds good in an elevator pitch kind of way. However, focusing on servicing the theme quickly wears thin and often becomes overbearing, and probably what draws it away from more show-specific content. Whereas the Library of Wisdom took a more character-focused approach and had a lot more freedom and variety for its content. As broad, light, amusing novelty books, I think they are very well done. As Simpsons books, not so much. But beyond the characters not sounding like themselves, the writing is otherwise fine, with one massive exception. The way the Lisa book is written is absolutely insufferable. The shallowest, cringiest attempt to pander to geek culture. I should have been tipped off by them feeling the need to give Lisa glasses on the cover. Also, I know it's the title, but the number of times the book uses the words geek and or chic is... I don't know, this one just feels completely different to the others. It just reads like the lamest one-track attempt from a middle-aged person trying to relate to preteens how cool being a nerd is, to the point that, time again, I genuinely would not buy that one even for the sake of completing the collection. Thankfully, I guess, this was the only one where that was the case. Also, I was extra annoyed with the Lisa book cause my copy was missing one of the inner booklets, but obviously I didn't think it was worth returning to get a new one. Even though subjectively the Lisa book is the one I enjoyed the least, objectively, the worst are the Abe and Bartman books. They're not bad, but compared to the others, there is a notable drop in the effort, creativity, and interactive elements, i.e. this series' best and defining features. Perhaps unsurprisingly, these were the last two books, and so it seems like maybe they started running out of steam and inspiration. The ideas for the interactive elements were mostly just repeated from earlier books. The Abe one particularly was the only one that really felt phoned in. For example, there's 16 pages taken up by comics. Most of the other books also have comics, but as separate booklets, whereas this one is clearly just a desperate attempt to meet the page count, which is so unlike the other books. Ditto, most of the interactive elements that it does include are uninspired, repetitive, lazy, and unnecessary. Meanwhile, the Bartman book has its own problem of being the furthest removed from the show and really pushes to the extreme that issue I have with the books not feeling Simpson-specific enough. But the objectively best, as well as subjectively my favorite, is the Mr. Burns book. Not only does it exemplify those best features of the series, but it's also the one that moves closer to the idea of a more Simpson-specific book. It doesn't completely break away and become that, but definitely more moments that step away from the disappointment I was mentioning and towards what I would have expected from a Simpsons book, embracing the show a lot more. This was probably also helped by the Mr. Burns book being the least slavish to the guidebook gimmick. It's more character-focused and just uses the theme as an overarching idea rather than overbearingly worked in. But despite that stuff on the individual level, one thing that contributes enormously to the positive regard I have for these books is that, same with the Library of Wisdom, it's a series. If they'd have just done one or two, I'd have thought, okay, that's fun, but not really fulfilling or meaningful. Whereas having 6 is so much more satisfying and enjoyable. Of course, I wish they'd have continued to do more, especially because each book contains part of a larger poster that, as it stands, is incomplete, indicating abandonment of a plan for even more books. So it's very sad we miss out on what was intended to be an even larger series. At least, however, unlike most books or small series, what we did get is substantial enough to feel content that this was a good, worthwhile exploration of the concept. The person I envisage enjoying these books the most is absolutely the 10 to 12-year-old Simpsons fan. Really just this generation's version of me when I fell in love with Bart's Guide to Life, especially because when you're at that age you're freer to just enjoy stuff at face value without scrutinizing everything, though of course they're also delightful to older fans who are young at heart enough to appreciate them.